I'm delighted to say Mike Carlson is with us this morning. We're going to talk some NFL because now we know the details of exactly who is still alive and who is dead when it comes to the season. Mike, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. I haven't gotten to my new shaving kit this morning, but it went on a long time last night.
Yeah,
it was worth it.
Right down to the final second. So there was a weird sequence of results which meant that if the Las Vegas Raiders and the Los Angeles Chargers, I'm still getting the names of those two teams wrong, if the Raiders and the Chargers decided to, they could have just kneeled out the game and both would have gone through. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, it was that way from the start. It had the implications. The beneficiaries were Pittsburgh, who also won in overtime, and because their record with one tie, 9-7-1, was better than the 9-8 teams, they get in as the final seed in the AFC. But had the Raiders and Chargers decided to just let it end in a tie, rather than my man Daniel Carlson kicking a 47-yard field goal to win it, they both would have been in. Pittsburgh would have been out. Cincinnati would be playing New England instead of Las Vegas, which I think would be a much more interesting matchup. But it's not soccer. We don't make they don't make deals in the fourth quarter to do that. I kept thinking about Germany and Austria back in Ger in Spain, and the first year I was in Britain, Coventry and Bristol did a similar thing at the end of a game when they realized if they drew, they both would go through.
We did it. Ireland did it with Holland in the World Cup in 1990. Ruud Gullit and Mick McCarthy kind of essentially shaking hands, and not in any way subtly, Mike, at all. There was so the last 20 minutes of the game was basically the keepers kicking into each other.
Yeah, and it's what I guess you would say it's the smart thing to do when results are more important than process, basically.
So why didn't they do the smart thing then? Why didn't they just kneel it out for the whole thing?
It's the nature of the game. I think is to play to win. I was laughing as I was listening in the earlier games to people loudly complaining that why are they doing this? If they lose, they'll get the number one pick in the draft. It's as if people look at the game as being Madden or fantasy football. The players aren't thinking about whether their team is going to be able to draft someone who might replace them next season. They're going to play to win. And as it turned out, the two worst teams in the league both won, the Jacksonville and Detroit. So that they stayed in their draft positions, and the Jags get the first pick and Detroit gets the second.
It is mad. I presume the players are all bonused to win as well. So every time they win, they get more money, and that's one of the things that prevents us.
Not necessarily. Team bonuses are. I'm not even sure if they're legal under the contracts.
Okay. Right.
But there's no win bonus I'm sure in most players' contracts. And I'm thinking desperately as I'm sitting here with quarterbacks and stuff. But as far as I know, is that mostly they're on individual achievements, which I guess is it puts the whole thing in a nutshell right there. That individual achievements over long-term team result.
Right. And just to explain to everybody, in this game that we're talking about, it's the final game of the slate of the season, of the regular season, and Vegas are 2 touchdowns up with about 4 minutes left to go, and somehow managed to choke and let the Chargers back into it through brilliant play by the Chargers to send the game to overtime, at which point, once it's gone to overtime, fair enough, now they're both going through again, right?
Yeah, they're both through. They have to play the overtime, obviously. The Raiders come down in overtime and they stall and kick a field goal. So they're up by 3, but the Chargers then get the ball back. And they go down and stall and kick a field goal. And now you've got about 2.5 minutes left. And in fairness, if the Chargers were able to stop the running play, which they were unable to do for most of the game, they might well have wound up with a tie, but Josh Jacobs gets a couple of big runs that puts Vegas down into position, and then they get one pass play that sets them up to win the game. It was incredibly frustrating, I think, if you were a Chargers fan, because They could have easily won the game. Not easily, but they could have won the game in regulation had a few breaks gone their way. There was an incredibly bad call for an ineligible receiver downfield with an interior lineman on the other side of the field being flagged. And, of course, Brendan Staley, who's made a specialty of going for it on fourth down, early in the game, in the third quarter, when they're only down by 3, he goes on fourth down at his own 18-yard line and turns the ball over. And they hold Vegas, again, just to a field goal, but those 3 points could have been crucial, or were crucial actually, in the big picture of things. So it was a fascinating and frustrating and exciting game. And I'm not a big fan of the extra game in the season, the 17th game and the 18th week that was added this year. And I think what we've got, because they've also added one extra playoff team, is a fairly mediocre wild card round of games. But you couldn't argue with 3 crucial games all going to overtime. 3 games where somebody was playing for a spot in the playoffs, and San Francisco beating the Rams in Los Angeles, and Pittsburgh managing somehow to beat Baltimore. Like every Pittsburgh win this season, it's hard to believe they did it, but they got into the playoffs. The Niners got into the playoffs. And obviously Vegas goes into the playoffs and the Chargers go home.
You say it's a mediocre wildcard round, and obviously part of that is because it's bloated compared to a couple of seasons ago, but is part of it because it is a mediocre NFL season anyway, and I mean, if you're judging the very top quality at the moment, I mean, from a neutral standpoint, it's been amazing the way it's been so exciting over the last couple of weeks that anybody could have qualified for the playoffs. But especially when you look at, say, the Titans getting a bye in the wild card round, is the standard of the top teams at the moment just that little bit less than it was a couple of seasons ago?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There's some external or extraneous factors involved, mainly COVID, which, week to week, a lot of teams never knew who was going to be playing for them. But there was I don't think there is an outstanding team this season based on their regular season play. Green Bay and Tampa, with 4 losses each in the NFC, might make a case, and they've got the great quarterbacks, and that helps. But Tampa, without all of the receivers they've lost, are not the team they were last year. And as you said, Tennessee, the biggest surprise, I think, of the season, because once Derrick Henry was injured and lost for the rest of the season, he may be back. They get the bye week, and so he may be back in 2 weeks to play in the playoffs. But Tennessee's not an outstanding team by any means, and the Chiefs, who are everybody's sort of preseason favorites to win the AFC, were very, very average for a good part of the season. They got their defense together toward the end of the year, but they're still kind of erratic offensively, and teams have discovered ways of stopping them. Nobody else stands out. You could put the rest of the teams into a big sack and pick out 2 of them, and then pick out another 2, and there wouldn't be that much difference between them.
Yeah, maybe Buffalo. What Buffalo have done in every game they win by double-digit points. And the games they lose are obviously close games where they get beaten and they look horrible. So they're kind of a Jekyll and Hyde team.
Yeah, a lot of it depends on Josh Allen, and the games they've been winning in the second half of the season have been when Allen runs a lot. Which is the formula they were trying to get away from, because obviously you don't want your quarterback being your main ball carrier and risking injury. They're a very solid defensive team, although not necessarily spectacular. And my best bet of the week this week was to take the Jets, who were getting 16.5 points against Buffalo, and Buffalo staged a kind of fourth quarter comeback that they won the game by 17. So I was a bit disappointed in that. But they are what we thought they were at the start of the season, a very well balanced team who can play really good defense and have the advantage of home field, at least for a week. It's a very tough place for most teams to play. And I'm not sure if it's a good or a bad thing that New England goes up to Buffalo next weekend to play, because when New England played them in bad weather up in Buffalo, the Patriots dominated the game. And then Buffalo came down to New England a couple of weeks ago and dominated the Patriots. So this is kind of like a rubber match, which might be interesting but might fizzle out. It might have been more interesting to see the Chargers the Chargers or somebody go up there. the best thing in some ways about this part of the season is that weather is such a big factor. New England cannot win in Miami in December when they go down to the hot weather, and lots of teams cannot win in Buffalo in December when you go up and it's snowing. And the same applies to Green Bay. So, the most crucial thing I think for them is they're simply going to be at home in the playoffs, and at home they have a huge advantage at this point in the season.
Let's talk a little bit about the Rams and the 49ers. The Rams were blowing out the 49ers at halftime, 14 points up, and looked like Sean McVay was celebrating on the field with his players, which is apparently unusual and doesn't happen that much.
The end zone, no less.
Yeah, bad form. But McVay has had never lost a game where his team led at halftime up to this week. He's also 0-6 against Kyle Shanahan as a head coach. So that might tell you something, because he was once Kyle Shanahan's assistant. But, I thought the Niners just did a brilliant job. And the kind of shorthand version of this would be in the last quarter of the season, Matt Stafford has become very erratic in the fourth quarter of games, and the critics are going, oh, this is what he did in Detroit and all. But the reality is, halfway through the year, they lost Robert Woods. They were 7-1 at that point. They went 5-4 now the rest of the season, with Cooper Kupp stepping up and having just a tremendous year as the solo main threat for this team. But it showed, I think, that even though Kupp was making his plays, not having that real secondary threat, which is what Kupp was when Robert Woods was there, really hurt them. I think it hurt their offense overall. And when the chips were down, they went away from the run game, which is what they've been doing for the past couple of weeks, was mostly with Sony Michel. And I think that hurt the Rams too. It doesn't really affect them too much. They wind up in the fourth seed, but they have to play Arizona next week, which ought to be, they've met twice already in the season. They know each other well, but that ought to be an interesting game, because the Cardinals are right now in a tailspin, and one of them has to right themselves at this point.
Okay, and do the 49ers have any chance of beating the Cowboys?
For the Niners, I mean, it is great if you're old enough to remember those great Dallas-San Francisco matchups, in the Steve Young kind of years, when Deion Sanders was bouncing back between the two teams. And I think they can. They're a frustratingly almost good defensive team, and that's going to be the most interesting part. Dallas, I keep saying, they're not as good as the sum of their parts. There's a lot of big names there. Oddly enough, Cedric Wilson, who's not a big name, has been playing great since he replaced Michael Gallup, who got hurt. The key to me is defensively. Dallas is a better defensive team than they've been in a couple of years. The addition of Micah Parsons has been a big part of that. So it's whether Dan Quinn, who's the coordinator, the former Falcons head coach, can actually coordinate the defense, to play well enough to hold the Niners in check. And, I thought Jimmy G, for all of the criticism he gets, he played an incredibly strong game for the Niners. He really stood in against the rush. He made a couple of big plays when he was about to go flat on his back, and he deserves a lot of credit in that game.
Yeah, he needed to take them down the field with 1:40 left on the clock, and he managed to do it. He, I think, is playing for a new contract with a new team next season as well. And
probably, yes.
He probably made himself between 30 and 50 million over the lifetime of his contract last night.
Yeah. The only thing holding him back from any team that looks is probably his injury history, which is a kind of red flag. I guess the other thing you have to say about San Francisco is Deebo Samuel is just amazing. And, the last week of the season, when everybody's watching the big games, is a great time to make your case for all pro or new contracts. And Deebo certainly made a really strong case over the weekend. I think that's going to vault him into some kind of thing that they're trying to create a position for him as a running back stroke receiver. But I'd put him in as, certainly second team All-Pro as a receiver. He's just amazing.
Which of these wildcard games is going to be the most fun, Mike?
The most fun? Probably probably Cincinnati and the Raiders. Or Los Angeles and Arizona. That's where you have the chance of really big offensive explosions. Dallas, San Francisco might be the most evenly matched and interesting of the games. Buffalo and New England will be another one that's probably tightly matched. If the Patriots fall behind, the game's over. But if they don't, it could be, given the weather conditions, possibly what most of the audience would consider a boring kind of game, but actually a pretty good one. I think Tampa and Kansas City against the two Pennsylvania teams are probably going to be heavy favorites, and anything other than that would be a huge shock.
You mentioned the Patriots there. You went to college, I think, with Belichick. Did you manage to get anything out of him with regards to New Year's resolutions that reporter tried and struggled to get?
Wasn't that great? And what made it so great was that it was a horrible loss for them, and most of their losses this season have been horrible losses, which is maybe a sign of a young team or an old coach. I don't know which. But someone asked a question, Bill mumbled an answer, and someone else did, and then there was this sort of like 45 seconds of silence where nobody had any other questions, and so the reporter just popped up and said, "Well, it's not football, but I'm doing a piece on New Year's resolutions. Have you made it?" And Bill just, the look on his face, it was like the laser beams were coming out from his eyes. And in fairness, she asked it again the following week when moods were lighter, and Bill just said, "Well, that's personal, and I'm not going to share that." It's like I would have liked to see Joe Judge answering that question instead.
Sorry, we didn't mention Joe Judge. This is one of the most remarkable things.
That's why I dropped him in.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if everybody saw this, right? So the Giants are one of the worst teams in history at the moment. They're playing so bad, but they have the ball inside their own 10-yard line. It's third down, 3rd and 9, and they take a victory formation, QB sneak formation, to try and make 1 yard for 3rd and 9. Surely it's a sackable offence.
They actually did it twice, a second time in the game. Joe Judge's explanation, which you could have figured out, was they wanted room to punt. They wanted, they didn't want their punter backed up against the end line. But given the calls on 1st and 2nd down, Joe Judge had said, they're playing the Washington team football, or WTF as I call them, and WTF had a bench fight. A couple of players had got into a little fisticuffs the week before, and Joe Judge said, "Oh, they're clowns there." And Ron Rivera, the coach in Washington, got all upset about this, and so I mean, immediately the clown memes came up when Judge did that. 3 weeks ago, the Giants said his job was safe for reasons beyond any comprehension. And I would agree with you that, to me, that if I were the owner of the team, I would have walked out on the field and given him his pink slip right then and there. Gettleman, the general manager, is already supposedly out. They fired they've gone through coaches 2 years and out, 2 years and out, 2 years and out now for 3 coaches in a row. They didn't want to make this a habit, but the fact is they've been terrible for the last 5 seasons, 6 seasons, and they're not showing signs of turning it around. And you can say, well, Daniel Jones was injured, but if Daniel Jones is the answer to their problems, he hasn't shown it in the last 3 seasons. So, yeah, I would be surprised if John Mara, the owner there in New York, does fire Judge, but I certainly agree that would be the smart move.
Today's Black Monday, is it? Is today the day that all the coaches get fired? Or
yeah, and I actually think there won't be as much movement as you might expect. The league changed their tampering kind of rules so that 2 weeks ago teams could have fired coaches and then started interviewing, but that was an opportunity that went missing, which is good because coaches coaching other teams should not be, bothered by this at that stage of the season. You've got a couple of interim coaches who obviously you think the teams are going to move on from. But if the Raiders actually were to make a playoff run, Rich Bisaccia, who took over in a very chaotic situation with John Gruden, might well have made a case for his being retained. Jacksonville obviously need a coach. Chicago is likely to fire Matt Nagy, and there might be one or two others. Minnesota might fire Mike Zimmer. That's an interesting one because he's been there a long time, but he's had two bad seasons in a row. And of course, there's a lot of talk about Seattle. Now, they won't fire Pete Carroll, but they might talk to him about stepping down. And in a sense, they were playing like it was his last game against Arizona, but that might be enough to convince him to come back for another season. I can't see them sacking Pete Carroll. He goes if he wants to go.
Okay, we'll watch that with bated breath because Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll won't be a couple next season no matter what happens, it feels like. Anyway, Mike, good stuff. Always great to have you with us. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Mike Carlson giving us his thoughts there on the end of the regular season. Are you full Bills Mafia?
I will be now. I kind of want to get on I kind of feel like the Giants would be a good thing to get in on the ground level of right now. It's just so bad. It'll be fun. Joe Judge has immediately become a hero of mine after that. I was in an 11-minute rant last week where he says he's got players who used to play for him earning money elsewhere, calling him up every week saying, I want to come back and play for the Giants, which was, I think Bill Barnwell did a breakdown of exactly who it could be, and he distilled it down to one player who it definitely wasn't. I can't remember who it was. So, I mean, anybody who can bullshit their way to the very top, I mean, got a lot of time for them. So I'm a Joe Judge fan.
Yeah, you would enjoy trolling the Giants fans anyway.
I mean, I think the next season get in at ground level.
Rooney Mara, the actress, she's connected to the ownership somehow. She's a family member of the Mara dynasty.
Oh, they're the same Maras.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. There you go, a little.
That is a nugget on a Monday morning.